So we need the panelists, the BIM panelists up to the stage now.
This is part of a 3-part series that we've been conducting since April or May of earlier this year. We really wanted to focus on infrastructure and its impact on public and private agencies alike, both in the US and the UK, since this is the International Highway Engineering Exchange Program. I'll be your host moderating the discussion today. And how did this come about? Well, last year at IHEEP in the hospitality suite, and those of you who attend IHEEP knows that's where all the good work gets done, John pulled myself and a few others aside, and as the incoming president, really wanted to do something a little bit deeper. He wanted to take a deeper dive into, we've been talking about BIM for quite a long time. We've been talking about the future state of where we want to be for quite a long time. But we've never really done a deep dive into what's holding us back. And the answer is not simple, it's quite complex. But one of the things we've discovered is that in having a conversation and a dialogue about it, we see there are actually some paths forward that we're already defining, and it may not be as complex as we are making it. So John had a cabinet of advisors, if you will, from the IHEEP organization, as well as Keysoft and Bluebeam, who came along as sponsors, and said, we will help you and support you in sponsoring this conversation and fostering the conversation. So we started off with 2 webinars. The first one was in May, the second one was in June with ENR. And before I tell you about that, just note this website. There's a list or an address at the bottom. This is the web page where the first 2 webinars are held, if you want to go back and listen to them, because we are not going to repeat what we've already covered there. But before we jump into that, we conducted a survey. Keysoft was nice enough to host this for us. And we conducted a survey. 46% of the respondents were from DOTs, 26% were from private engineering companies. And we asked them a couple questions in order to really focus our conversation so that we weren't talking into a vacuum, but that we were talking to what the members really wanted to hear. So we got some of our initial results. 40% have said that they've invested in best practices, and 16% have said that they're implementing BIM workflows. That 16% number seems pretty small to me. And then we asked them a little bit about what are some of the areas within your business that you hope to improve. And ranked from the most clicks to the least, I think you'll see here we picked the top 4: asset management, digital paperless project delivery, streamlining workflow, ease of collaboration with consultants. These are all topics that came up today. The roll call today was impressive. In my 9 years of coming to IHEEP, I have never heard such a robust roll call of all the initiatives that are in place, which tells us we are absolutely on the right track. And then finally, what is it that you've identified or that you see that is blocking your BIM implementation? And these 3, we're going to hopefully dig into today to determine if they are myth or reality. Capability of existing technology, 31%. Personnel is resistant to change, 20%, and the upfront cost, 14%. I think from what we heard from some of the speakers today, we're seeing that those, what I would call barriers, are dissolving in front of us because we are finally making it a priority that we solve this problem. And then I also wanted to touch a little bit on Dodge Analytics, who had done a great study on the business value of BIM for infrastructure in 2017. They will be presenting a keynote, I believe, tomorrow. And their numbers tell a little bit of a different story. So BIM uses at a high level of implementation on at least half of their projects grew from 20% in 2015 to 52% in 2017. So this morning we heard change when it happens quickly. I think we're seeing an example of that. And owners requesting BIM on transportation projects in the US, 58%. And we can hear some more about the UK perspective with the UK BIM mandate. But if the owner doesn't know exactly what they want and how they want it and how they're going to use it, we're all going to be in a world of trouble. So these are some owners who are sitting on the stage today who have done that hard work. They've done the hard work to determine what works, what doesn't, and they're also done the hard work to identify what's really holding them back, which I hope we can kind of go into today. So the webinars I was mentioning earlier, so we did the 2 webinars. These are the sponsors. We did it virtually with cameras on. That was so fun. So this is the first time I'm actually, some of us are getting to meet each other face to face, which is great. I'm going to pass fuss because I want to get straight to the conversation. So this is the part where I'm going to let the panelists go one by one to introduce themselves, and panelists, Your instructions are to introduce yourself, the company you work for, your role with the company, and then what you're hoping to get out of today's specific conversation. So I'll start with you.
Thank you. My name is Will Barron. I'm with Keysoft Solutions, and I'm the director. I've been working for the company for getting on for 3 decades, across 3 decades. What we offer are design solutions, and we're really just one piece of the jigsaw. And the thing I really want to understand from this conference is how we can fit into the BIM story. BIM really is the whole process, and collaboration was one of the words that I picked from what Sasha was introducing. Rather than compete, it's really good if software companies can actually provide data from the users of their software and enable that collaboration.
Great.
Hi, I'm Kenny Park from Aston University in Birmingham. I'm the deputy head of the subject group, which is Engineering Systems and Management, where we have the construction-related programs as well as transportation programs as well. So I'm the program director for the construction part as well. So I'm an educator, so what I'm interested in is how we're just going to bring the topic for kind of the practitioner as well as the future workforce as well. So here, I'm just glad to see a lot of people from the DOT and good practices as well. So I could share some of the examples that I've seen in the UK for the past 11 years.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Ben Constable. I have been with Kiewit for a little over 20 years. I am fortunate enough to work for Kiewit Infrastructure Engineering Group, which is a newly created design firm within Kiewit. And it's a very unique position to be able to be so close to the construction side and then be involved in the design challenges that we have to support that. I'm most interested in definitely talking to the departments of transportation about their interest in transferring the information to the contractor through the design. Very curious about utilities and obviously machine guidance, which I heard a lot of this morning.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Daniel Jensen. I'm with Michael Baker International. And recently I've been involved a lot with kind of our 3D modeling programs that we've been using with Baker. I'm actually a civil structural designer for bridges, but that's kind of my new role, is kind of helping Baker kind of lead that up and figuring out where we can take it. So I'm really interested just to see, you know, who I can network with and what kind of ideas we can get throughout the all the companies. So thanks.
Hi, my name's...
Okay. My name is Lance Sparvey. I'm from Wisconsin Department of Transportation. I'm in the Southeast Freeways area. And so I'm a design construction engineer. So I'm in the trenches and also a BIM coordinator. So work all the way from a lot of different kind of major projects down to smaller projects. I want to take 10 seconds to respond to Connie's challenge. I only can get it to 17 words, okay? So bear with me. BIM is a digital, multidisciplinary, collaborative representation of physical and functional characteristics for the life cycle of a transportation or infrastructure facility.
Excuse me. My name's George Lukes. I'm from the Utah DOT. I am the state design and standards engineer, and I'm leading, we call it MBDC, Model-Based Design and Construction, formerly IDC, formerly 3D models for construction, and hopefully we get some name that everyone's going to use. But with that said, what I'm looking for is to gain some nuggets from other DOTs of what doing specifically to move past the challenges, talk with software developers, contractors, vendors, and find out what we can do to keep moving this forward.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Phil Bell with New York State DOT. I'm a Bureau Director in the Office of the Environment. I am the Everyday Counts Coordinator for New York State DOT, and I'm also the BIM Coordinator. We've been at this for a number of years, and I think it's going to be a challenge for all state DOTs, but knowing your processes, knowing what your needs are and how you want to accomplish the kinds of results you're looking for, I think is one of the keys. And we'll have a good discussion on how to do that.
Let's play ball, gentlemen and ladies. And so the topic for today is really looking at roadblocks versus barriers and truly defining that. But as we go through each section, I'm going to kick off a question and let the panelists answer that question. But then as we wrap up, don't take offense, I may cut you off if we're looking at time, because we only have a limited amount of time. But I may cut you off in order to get you involved, and I'll look to Rochelle to respond or give us some of the questions that you may have. So starting off at the beginning here, roadblocks versus barriers. The reason we wanted to talk at this level was we feel like there's some blocking and tackling in a practical level that really needs to be done in order for us to make some strides in what we were hearing from FHWA earlier about really defining the business case and the business processes behind BIM. So one of the things that I wanted us to talk first through was first defining roadblocks versus barriers. The definition has been Construction Progress Coalition, others have talked through it. A roadblock is something that stands in your way and it cannot be moved. You're best served to pivot and find a new direction to go around it. A barrier is something that if you hunker down or partner or persevere, you can push through it. It's a permeable barrier. And so what I want to ask the panelists today, and I'm actually going to start, George can kick off the response, but I really want to talk through how have you differentiated between the two in your organization, and how is that impacting your priority to deliver? We're going right into it.
Poor Sasha. She asked if we had any comment on that, and so I sent her back like a 37-page, 4-volume thing on it. But basically, I guess in our organization, we don't look at almost anything as a roadblock per se, and they're mostly barriers. If there were a roadblock right now, it's probably software platforms. We don't have any control over that. And getting the data to flow is probably the biggest issue we have right now. And the way we've pivoted with that is by sending files in different formats to contractors and then trying to reproduce that in the field through, essentially, we only use 2 tools right now, OpenRoads Navigator and a GIS platform. And it's a huge roadblock right now, is getting the data to flow. That's just from design to construction. And we want it also to be throughout the entire organization. So whether that's asset management, materials, environmental, geotech, any of that, we want to get the data in the center of our organization and then have software have the ability to get that out. So our biggest roadblock basically is data transfer.
Okay, so we're talking about technology. Yes, Lance, go ahead.
So I would also agree that there isn't a lot of major roadblocks in my mind. We started this BIM journey in 2011, so the software platforms were not exactly ready, and we were a multi-software vendor place, both Autodesk and Bentley. So I don't think the major, what I would consider now hurdles, so that they're easier than just barriers, and that is they're people-oriented or bureaucratic. So what I mean by that is to make sure that we get our information to the proper decision makers, that you're saving money, reduce change orders, and also to improved quality in the plan sets. And there's an investment needed, so that has to be communicated properly. And I don't think we communicate very well to the people that really need to make the decisions. Then there's the training part, having some of the tools. Of course, there's interoperability. That sometimes is needed, multiple tools that kind of come into play, but I don't think the biggest challenges are technological.
Good, I'm glad. I hope we can disagree, even if we agree to disagree. Phil?
Yeah, I agree with Lance. There's, through collaboration, coordination, communication, you can overcome just about any of these hurdles, and I agree with Lance with that word too. There's a way to find a solution towards any way to deliver a program, deliver a project. And if one specific file format doesn't work, we'll investigate, we'll work at it, and we'll find a different way to share that data. But the key is you have to have very good conversations with your customers downstream, whether it's from design to construction, to our contractors. We talk with them regularly, and through to asset management, and then back into planning and programming. You have to identify what their needs are, what their preferences are for the data, and then work towards ways to provide that data in the way that they need that information and when they need that information. So it's an ongoing process too. There's no solution today that won't need more improvement tomorrow.
And I want to switch to Michael if I can. We talked about one of the ways to overcome these is for partnership, and so Michael Baker, the company Michael Baker, choose your weapon. I want to, Daniel, I want you to go through a little bit of how you may see that as somebody partnering with the DOTs to deliver on this future state.
So I'd kind of agree with everybody partially. You know, we don't like to see roadblocks. We like to see something that we can get through eventually. But I would agree that, you know, software right now for us as designers really is the roadblock. There's a few things that we cannot get through, we can't accomplish unless we kind of adjust our way of thinking. More think of that as a barrier. You know, we need to either design a little bit differently. You know, every change could be a possible barrier or a roadblock. Let's see. I guess us as consultants, really we need to listen to what the DOTs have to say. You know, we need to go with their way of thinking. If they want something accomplished, we've got to go with anything that we can do to adjust our thinking to ensure that we provide them with an applicable project, something that's going to work for them.
Okay. It stings a little for the outer ring here.
Absolutely.
But that's why we're having a conversation about it.
Yes, I also agree that, you know, there's always so much innovation going on that we will absolutely get there. You know, I've worked with Bentley a whole lot, giving them feedback so that we can actually address some of those issues that we've run into.
Right. So again, that's a partnership. Half
Yes.
of a partnership is saying this solves it, this does not. Ben, I want to hear from your perspective. Ben has been very kind this entire time to wear the shoulders, on his shoulders, the GC role, the lone GC.
That's a big role. I do agree. I think software today, I have down here that there's no silver bullet software, that a lot of the software firms are trying to create the end-to-end solution. I think of the big 3, 4 in the room, and I think about that each of them has their niche, that they understand a certain sector, and that's how they got here, and now they're trying to figure out the rest of it. I will say another barrier, I think, is that the 3 stages, you have the owner, the designer, and the contractor, all are trying to figure out how they can use a model internally, and then what is the product that they're going to give to the next group. So the owner wants to get the designer engaged to be able to give the contractor something. The contractor wants to give something back to the owner, in terms of asset management, that kind of thing. So we have the challenge of figuring out how to utilize the model internally for our own needs, and also give something to the next group that will benefit them immensely as well.
One follow-up question to that, as you each look at each other from the contractor side to the owner side, in some instances, are each of you a barrier for each other in that process?
Yeah.
I'll let you speak first.
Well,
and then.
I mean, this has been a great experience for me to be able to understand what the DOTs are looking at, and I am a little confused at times that one group looks at another thinking that they're not they're not able to understand the data being given to them. And I think that is, the quality of different firms that you work for on all 3, the quality of DOT, the quality of design firm, and the quality of contractor to understand the technology. And, we work, the guys up on the stage here obviously have invested a ton of money in VDC and BIM and that type of thing. I know certain contractors are investing a lot. There's a lot of concern about making it equal for the contractors. So if you give something out to them, will they be able to have the technology to use it and support it? So that is a challenge as well, is that it's not like paper. I always say that if you have at least one thumb and an eyeball, you're compatible with a piece of paper. Whereas to use this technology, you really have to invest a lot more.
Good. And I'd like to hear from the other side too. George or Lance, Phil? In what ways can the contractor sometimes be that barrier?
So from an owner's perspective, and we work with, a lot of times we work with consultants in our offices too that we are design bid build state. So I think the structure of design build and design bid build can sometimes seem like a hurdle or a barrier. But that can be overcome, but you have to be creative to make sure you follow the laws, but also to do it in a way that makes sense. And as far as we always told management that we're going to save money on the back end by the front end doing more on design. That doesn't go very well because you don't know what that promise is going to be. But on the designer's end, if you put a little money into the pot, so to speak, they get interested. So they'll produce a better quality product. Sometimes now we're even seeing that they say, even if you wouldn't require us to do BIM, we would do it anyways because it produces a better quality product. So, but I think there is a lot of, from the contractor perspective, you know, they densify the BIM model, and they do a lot of work. They would sometimes take a lot of different kinds of deliveries and deliverables and data sets, and they would be able to do a lot of, to run with it. So I think the contractors and the consultants, sometimes they're pushing the DOTs.
So kind of to get to your question, you said, do we sometimes get in the way, and do contractors maybe get in the way of us and consultants? And I think one of the things that really happens is we're changing a paradigm. I mean, before it was plan sheets, and everyone could read a plan sheet, and there wasn't an issue other than if we didn't put out the plan sheet organized enough, then a contractor may have a little bit of a struggle building the project. But now all of a sudden, I don't know if it's getting in the way of, it's understanding the other's business. And so we're trying to figure out what is the appropriate data to give to a contractor when in design, we have way more information in that design model than a contractor even wants to use. So a contractor gets that stuff, and I mean, half of the time, BJ from Kiewit in our area, he's like, you guys give me models, and the first thing I have to do is strip everything out because you've given me way too much. So I think understanding the others and what they need to give and get back is probably one of the biggest obstacles there.
Well, and to add to that, the design model has the design intent, but the construction model requires the means and methods. So we strip it down, but then we add our own level of complexity in how we're going to build the job by phase, by segment, those type of things.
Yeah, and if we understood that better, I think that'd be helpful.
Right.
Phil, did you have a comment before? I'm going to go to the UK perspective
Yes,
next. But,
yes.
okay.
I would follow up on what George says. We have to have continuous conversations with our contractors out there to understand what is it that they need to build the job. Every job is not the same. Every job has unique context, different risk requirements, those kinds of things. But as designers or as construction staff, or construction inspectors, our asset management folks, we need to know what data they need most to serve their needs in the best possible way and make that deliverable to them in a way that's most convenient. So essentially we're looking at a design model, and then you can, with that data, hit a button, and there you have your contractual model. Hit another button, you have your asset model. Hit another button, you have your planning model. That's how simple we want to make it. So what are the requirements for each of those separate but the same data components? That's where we're headed.
And I think that is a nice transition, that wish list, if you will, to the UK, because the UK is actively engaging in creating a top-down mandate to get to that state with the common data environment. Will, you seemed like you were ready to jump in and had a comment. Yep.
Yes, I'm going to offer a perspective I think isn't really just simply the UK, and I'm going to be fighting back a little bit for the software vendors. One of the, quite apart from the barrier that I think probably is a shared experience in here and all around the world perhaps, where you're finding it a bit of a struggle to upgrade and to actually get buy-in from systems people, quite apart from that, I think there is a little bit of a difficulty in actually understanding what is going to be done with the data. It's very clear when you're talking about the steps from design to construction, and there's some very eloquent statements being made here about that. But of course, BIM is the whole life cycle, and it's about connecting once the owners have the data. And I think to a degree the owners aren't really sure what they're going to do with the data and how that will inform the next planning and design cycle.
And Ken, from your perspective then, looking at this through the lens of academia and really understanding what the mandate is and how it's supposed to be pushing industry towards change, and then you as an academic really trying to create curriculum and equip that next generation to be ready for that. Based on what Will was saying, how do you see that playing out?
So we've got a lot of changes, in particular 2009, 2009 and 10 and 11. But actually, that comes from quite a long time ago, because 30, 40 years ago in the UK construction industry, they want to improve something in the AEC industry, but it didn't work that way. Then they initiated a lot of government kind of reports and so on. Even they wanted to have kind of standardized a kind of contract 30 years ago, but it happened 1994. They've got a big kind of the influencing kind of the report just out there. We just called it Latham report. And after that, 1998, they've got another report, a bit more radical, to change something, accept something. But we haven't talked about digitize the kind of built environment and so on. Then we've been through recession and other things. In 2011, and government, they published UK construction strategy, and they put 13 key areas they're looking at to improve it. So BIM was the part of it. Then they mandated it in April 2016. Then there are a lot of debates, in particular in both the industry as well as academia, because they are not ready yet. Because BIM is about people, process, technology, and process and technology, we're just getting there. We know what to do. But the problem is the people, in particular the mindset. Then the professor this morning mentioned that we're teaching the same thing for the past 4-5 decades. And one of my colleagues asked, we need to embed somehow BIM into it. Then how are we going to do it? One of the colleagues who spent 40 years said, do I need it? I'm going to retire next year. That's sort of problem. But good thing was we have two different bodies after 2011. One is a BIM task force group consisting of the industry and government, and they're trying to set and establish some other standard and guidance and so on. Then I'm a member of the BIM academic group forum, we called it. Then 20 universities just get together. We set the learning outcome for the bachelor level as well as the master level. So we've got the knowledge for level 5 and 6 and 7. So based on that, we're trying to embracing those topics into my curriculum. But another problem is, what sort of skill set we're gonna need it for 10 years, 5 years? We don't see that one. If you see the kind of different software, there are hundreds of them. So which one we're gonna go for? Then even the perception they're saying is, we are educator, not the trainer. But I mean, somehow they embrace some practical things into kind of curriculum. Even existing curriculum, they don't have the spaces to embrace it. That's another problem. It took me 7 years to embrace those learning outcomes into my curriculum. So time will be the issues as well. But the standards out there and technology is out there, then the thing is the time and mindset, how we're gonna tackle that.
And I think that's really important. It's that Venn diagram that we all know about, the people, process, and technology. We're entering into a new age, entering into a new way of thinking about the way we do business, that's a gargantuan task. So I think keeping focused on, it's never going to be one easy thing, to Ben's point. It's never going to be that easy button. And myself, having worked in technology now for 11 years, as soon as you show someone the possibility and there's a light at the end of the tunnel, they want streaming sunlight coming down from the heavens with that easy button. But I think the beauty is the technology should enable the dialogue and build the trust in order for the processes then to be defined. Because we cannot define the process based on what we're doing today, because it's a very different model. Rochelle, I wanted to check in with you and see if anyone from the audience was brave enough to ask some questions for the panel.
Yeah, so we've gotten a lot of really good questions. The first one did not have a name with it, but it was mentioned that it is important to understand what is needed for each function. Has anyone found design build processes to help figure out what the requirements are?
Yes. We have created some RFPs for design build, and it has the entire soup to nuts of what the requirements are, especially for the BIM deliverables, the BIM process, the BIM, the final delivery that we need. And so that's described. We've got 3 or 4 projects now where we've done that, as well as design bid build. So there are examples out there.
I would definitely say that there's we look at it as a use case. That's one of my favorite words. Anybody that knows me knows that. But a use case for a specific model and what it needs. And to that end, we then have what we call execution planning. So once you've identified a use case, such as machine guidance, now you go back and say, how are we going to get there? And that leads you to a conversation of what kind of processes you have, BIM processes, and ultimately software that would solve that problem. So my father, who's been with the company for over 40 years, taught me this. He's in quality control, and he writes these big manuals that are this thick for quality control manuals and things like that. And it's not about reading the manual in the end, it's about the process of writing that manual in the beginning, of that conversation of what is quality control on a project. That's something I learned. What is virtual design and construction, or what is BIM or SIM? What are those use cases about? That conversation of execution planning is the most important thing, not a checklist, not a how did the last project do it, how are you going to do it on this project is the most important.
As a follow-up, these requirements are really important because it depends on the project. Unfortunately, that's not the answer you want to hear, it depends. But we have a framework that we use, and it's been disseminated around. That'll be shared in one of the presentations. But it's very important to know what not to BIM. And for example, you can go to the level of detail on rebar, and are you going to save a lot of money there unless it's a fabrication model? You see what I'm saying? So, it depends on the project. Typically, we use BIM for reconstructions, and we use them for complex areas of projects, but it can be drilled down to, depending on what you need it for, if you're going to do 4D stage models, or 4D, showing how it's going to be constructed, constructability, or if you want to use it for quantities. So there's a lot of variability in it, but there's a framework that you can use that you can put together, like he's saying, a BIM execution plan.
And I want Will to be able to chime in as well. Randy and I were having a conversation through Twitter, that's how we do nowadays, about that exact topic, which was, are we looking at a framework that's flexible to be reapplied based on the constraints or the scope of the project, or do we really need something that is that concrete laws, codes, things that we have that are definite and defined so that we minimize risk, and that balance between the two? I don't know, you can answer what you're going to answer, but you may want to tackle that one as well too.
Well, it is very important to understand what to BIM. That's a nice phrase, I like that. And the BIM execution plan is you're planning ahead of time before you've even started designing digitally once, and then go to construction. And use case, again, it's a term that we use in software, which is very useful. If you think about a model, the digital model, the outcome, whatever that is, as being some kind of central repository of all of your data, it might be at the level of rebar and road markings, whatever it be, very, very granular. Then the use case in this particular context would be, how are you going to use that data? Is it for GIS analysis? Is it going to be for photorealistic visualization? You don't need any of the underground data if you want to get a driver's view. So it's very important, I think, just to maintain that data. We're all familiar with the sawtooth diagram, which at every stage some data is lost, and we try to avoid that. So if you maintain the data, then what am I going to use it for today? Is it going to be for doing colourful brochures? Is it going to be for some other use? And that's, I think, a very important thing to focus on.
George?
So I think we've done a lot of design build projects that have been helpful, and there's no question it's gotten automated machine guidance, it's gotten some level of development and things of that nature. But I think for our specific effort of trying to get to design bid build, where the model's a legal document and not using plan sheets, it's been exactly the reverse. We started with very, very small projects, but go into what you talked about with risk. The risk we've done by CMGC or CMAR, where contractors sitting in on the design side, looking at the model they're building versus the model that we're building and making sure that that data transfer is resulting in what we think it's resulting in. And I think in that regard, design build has helped us in that CMGC environment, but we're probably getting a lot more out of the CMGC environment than design build right now.
Great. I'm going to try and see if we can get to another question. Or Rochelle, did you have a comment? You can
Oh,
comment.
well, and so another question that we received without a name feeds right into this and kind of continues on it, so I think it's appropriate. Do we need to consider new and better workflows that capitalize on BIM rather than fit the technology into old processes?
Say that again?
Do we need to consider new and better workflows that capitalize on BIM rather than fit the technology into old processes? So I'm imagining, and maybe the person who asked the question wants to add to that, but I'm imagining, you know, we've got plans that we've put out forever that a certain way, and we're trying to make BIM fit that world. Do we need to consider new and better workflows to share that information, something different?
So I'd say absolutely, and I think the difference is, you know, it's always been plan-centric, and so maybe 40 to 70% of the time and effort goes into producing plans. Well, now that effort's going to go into producing a model that has all the metadata that are associated with it, and that's a completely different workflow. It's a completely different paradigm. What files do you put out? How are they organized? And maybe for Ben, what does the contractor need to get out of that? And so in the environment where we're talking with our contractors, we're finding we don't know their business. You know, there's 4 different areas where they need different kinds of information, and we're not giving it to them in a way that's productive for them. And so I think, again, I hear this over and over from everyone here, it's a collaborative process, talking with the contractors, talking with the vendors, talking with the software, talking with construction, and trying to figure out what those things are.
Yeah, one of the things I've noticed about BIM, or at least the way I understand it, it came from the vertical market. Once the building got above the ground, it was all proposed against proposed. It was how do we design against our design and enhance that design and get a quality product out of it. You know, eliminate errors in the design. What I really think has happened in the horizontal world, especially with highway design, is think about it, we don't get out of the ground as easy. We have 27 miles of stuff that's below the ground. And so it's an iterative process where the contractor may go out and discover a new utility that was not marked on the drawings. What are we going to do about that? It causes a whole design change. It causes a whole process. So BIM in our world has to be iterative. It has to be very flexible through the construction phase. Our biggest problem, and it's not a barrier, but it's a barrier, not a roadblock, is that we have to be able to go back and continuously improve the design through the construction process.
Just a minute's worth to follow. It's very important to understand exactly what he's saying in that it's a design model and a construction model, whereas a plan-centric is primarily for the design. They get back design issue notices and RFIs and a whole bunch of things, but the model is used in the construction, and then hopefully it could be reused later for O&M. But a critical thing just to realize it's a model-centric, and very, very critically, it can be used in so many different ways, downstream and upstream, that you don't realize. You might be looking at things like snow removal or tree growth, or you know, how some of these things will clash, the utilities will clash. And as he was saying, you run into the baseline schedule gets screwed up now. And now, how do you deal with it? If you have a model, you can jump on that and really kind of see what kind of a solution response you can have.
Daniel, I'm curious to see when they talk about defining new workflows, you and I were talking about that earlier.
Yes, just to quickly touch on this kind of from a consultant aspect, you know, a lot of stuff has changed just in our office of how we tackle these projects. Just in personnel, you know, typically we had a drafter, a designer, checker, overview, but now it's completely changed to the point where the designer is the modeler, and then, you know, you still have your checker, but how do we check these documents? That's completely changed. It's completely changed how we submit those documents to UDOT. All that information has adjusted because it's in a completely different style, completely different. So,
Yeah, I'd like to add to that too. That added a new step in our process of quality assurance for the model, where we hung our hat on this, a 3D model that was going from design to the contractor. So we said, well, in order to best assure that all the data is in there that we want and is accurate and complete, we had to as well do another check internally to make sure the model was to the level of quality that we expected it to be.
Kenneth, if I could go to you quickly, because you said it took you 7 months, 7 years? 7 years to incorporate BIM into the curriculum. And it's going to take a village for us to get there. It can't just be the owners spending the time figuring it out and saying, ah, here it is, this is exactly what we need, and here's how you do it. How does academia fit into that?
I just like to share the kind of information. Say, in past 1192, the series, it's quite helpful even for the academia as well, because we have to talk about based on the same language. So like we talk about the meaning of the HEEP this morning, right? They talk about differently. So when we talk about common data environment, we have to understand it, what exactly talking about each other. So the UK government pushes out of it, mandated, then they provide some of the platform to move on. So such as PASS or Construction Industry Council protocol, they define the language and platform and basic flow that you need to adopt it for your practices, even for the academia as well. So 1192 is a free, PASS means a publicly available kind of specification, but it becomes the ISO. So first the two part will be published by the end of this year. So ISO 19650, that costs you. But if you look at the PASS, the contents that when I saw the draft of the ISO, it's more or less similar to the PASS series. So if you can start up with the PASS series to understand it, share that with the client, designers, consultants, and contractors, that'll be a good starting point, I think.
And I actually happened to eavesdrop in a Slack channel for the UK BIM Alliance, and it is defined, clearly defined. PAS 1192, Google it, you would look at what the requirements are for a CDE, for the different levels of BIM, very specific about how to issue the content, where to store it, how to make sure it's recalled. Yet I see in that Slack channel constant arguing over, how come nobody's reading, nobody's following the standard, we're interpreting it differently. So I think it's iterative. We have to recognize out the gate just that alone will not solve the problem.
And if I could just add briefly what it can help with, even if it's not adopted in full into the ISO, there's a glossary of terms, so it helps us to share the language.
Absolutely. Lance?
I just want to say, I'm a little nervous or concerned that we will, in hearing that we have to wait for, IFC 5 or whatnot, that concerns me because there's so much out there now that you can utilize and you can move forward. And just like, how many of you here use the National CAD standards or some modified version for your DOTs or consultants? Most have not reinvented that wheel. They've used this modified kind of standard. And you can modify slightly some of these things if they make more sense for you. So I think we need to move forward. The question I think was really good in that it said, do you force fit BIM into our plan-centric world? And I would say maybe we're going to tweak it differently. And I've been really impressed with some of the DOTs that are moving forward in small small steps, where they're taking BIM and they're doing a bridge that way, or they're doing a small roadway section. But can we get rid of cross sections when you have a very robust model? Do we have to have plan sets that are 3 times as large as they need to be? And the other thing is, does this mean that you get rid of plan sets? For the DOT side, at least at Wisconsin, I don't see that for the foreseeable few years ahead, but it's possible in the future. Maybe they're cloud-based, everything's available, but I would say that you can move forward. We could maybe start moving forward that we can use BIM in a more responsive way.
I want to check in with Rochelle. Did you have another question that popped up?
Yes, Rick Lovell, SRF Consulting. Cultural workforce challenges to adoption exist in both the private and public sector. What unique strategies have been used to help overcome this?
It's a great one. That's the people part.
So I don't know if it's unique or not, but essentially done is identified individuals within the organization and in the consulting community and contractors who want to come to the table, who want to do it. And believe me, there's a lot of people out there who just have the nerves and don't want to do it. It's not that they don't want to go in that direction, but they want to see what happens first and then do it. So being able to choose someone who's going to sit there and go, yeah, we're going to do whatever we need to do to see how this is going to work, and if it doesn't work out, we're going to learn from it. So I think within the organization, for us, we're probably 80% consultants. Having our consultants on board and knowing which ones are going to move forward, knowing the contractors that are going to use that technology and help through it is huge.
So just really quick in the consulting, you need a lot of support from your community, your environment. And, initially these projects are going to take upwards of twice the time what they originally would. So that extra support from your managers, from, UDOT, the contractors, knowing that you're going to be back and forth in communication, trying to get that information, definitely, you need that type of person that's going to take that extra time and forward the initiative.
Go for it.
I'm just going to add really quick. Daniel's on our BRIM project, and we're just awful as the DOT. It's pretty much just, just get it done, okay?
I just want to say, remember the days when, and I had arguments, we were moving forward with CAD, and I had arguments with the drafters that just were screaming at me and saying, I can do it faster than your CAD can do. And I say, okay, you're probably right, and it actually looks better than my Leroy that's automated. But then I said, well, now I'm going to make 3 changes on these plan sets. And then they said, okay, you win. You know what I mean? So I think the key thing, the question about the workforce, it's very, when we bring in young people and they see that they can do modeling, they just dive into it. And I think we're going to lose a lot of workforce if we don't adopt a different way of doing things.
Phil?
Just to add briefly, we find champions. We find people who are very motivated to just tackle the problem. They're skilled with modeling. They're not afraid of technology. They're not afraid to do new things. It's all about change. And those champions are really the ones to make it happen. And we rely on them.
I guess one more thing I'll add is communication. I found that we call it the federated model. I don't know if that's a common term or not, but bringing the different disciplines together, where you have utilities and you have civil and you have walls and roadway. Before, it was always a paper trail of communication. One group would finish their design, hand it over to the next group. They would look at it. They would do their design. The drainage folks would always be the last ones to wait for all the rest of the design to even understand it. But through a federated model, it definitely enhances the speed of delivery in design to be able to have these disciplines talk to each other in a universal model.
I want to ask a question to the panel, kind of leading on that. I remember in 2010, 2011 at our user conference, we weren't getting a lot of submissions from customers who were talking about paperless projects, yet we were hearing about it on the front lines as we're supporting them and doing some implementation. It was about 2012, 2013, we finally started to get some of our first paperless project submissions, 2013. And somebody in the audience raised their hand and said, how did you get the project to go paperless? They said, we unplugged the printers. No joke. And that became kind of a rally cry for all the champions that were in the room who were like-minded, who were like, can we do that? Is that what can we unplug? So let me ask you the roadblocks versus barriers when you're thinking about those individuals within the firm who are not so apt to change, or what are some, Lance, that was a great tactic of kind of taking them through their logic till you'd brought them to the edge of the earth, and then they had to make that leap. What are some of those ways that you're converting them from roadblocks into barriers on the individual level, perhaps?
So I think when you bring young people in the workforce, and I realize the experienced folks are really needed, and so we don't want to minimize maybe their aversion to, like, say, a new technology. But I do think that if you show them that they can do their workflow in a more efficient way, we do see that they embrace it. It's just more of a, like when my wife laughs at me, I speak on technology, and she says, "You're not a good Facebooker." And then, I'll have my kids can zoom around, and do so much more sometimes. So I have my own issues, but what I was getting at is that, I think that that if there's a little bit more training or a little bit more kind of connecting, and I think the educational end, I'd like some of the comments to be done in there. We work with a lot of universities that help, move them forward towards the visualization end, and I think we will lose a lot of people that will not be interested in civil engineering in the future if we don't have the kind of the academia and the programs changed.
Yeah. There was a story, there's a gentleman by the name of Fred Mills who started a company called the B1M out of London, and he's a great advocate and educator of all things BIM, specifically for construction, but really across the industry. And he came to our conference and spoke, and he told a great story. He said, "When I tell my son, we gotta go, it's time to put on your shoes, my son will find every excuse not to go put on his shoes because I've just asked him to do a task he's not really interested in." He said, as a new father, it took me about 2 weeks to realize if I said, "Son, do you want to go to the playground? Do you want to go on the swings with Daddy?" His son's like, "Yeah, Daddy, I want to go," and dashes out the door. He's like, "Before you go, put on your shoes." He said he puts on his shoes so fast, barely even tied, but he's out the door. And he said, this is something that our industry also needs to think of and learn from, which is what incentive is there for that change to occur? Or what incentive is there for that learning curve to be tackled? What incentive are we putting in the way of individuals that's a tangible value? Are we finding out what their incentive is?
I just want to come back and maybe ask the audience to something along the lines of, I don't think we're helping management understand. And so I wanted to maybe see if there's people that are involved in management and people that are involved in this workforce kind of thing, just to share a little bit about the concerns they have. Maybe there's risks, dollars, hardware, software, the people part about being champions. I'm very interested in hearing what some of the barriers are, in the kind of the director level and in management.
And if someone wants to respond to that in Brave, I'll ask you to come down and actually see Rochelle, because she has a microphone so that everybody could hear you. Yes, and Will.
So I think one of the ways that we can motivate people who are otherwise finding this is just extra work for them is to make their work change. A lot of the time when we see people starting a design drawing, it is just a blank document. And if you think about the connection that BIM is, that brings you in a cyclical way back to the beginning every time, coming round and round, then maybe the start of a new project, a new design is really highly informed. It makes the decision-making process a lot better, reduces the frustrations. So it's connecting the end results of one BIM cycle back to the beginning that may start to actually pay dividends.
And you touch on something that I think is a key to our industry really making this transformation effectively, and that's resilience. As we've talked, and as you heard everybody during the roll call talk about the projects they're working on, the things that they're implementing, those aren't going to be out the gate successful, 100% perfect. We may hopefully be measuring for what success looks like, but hopefully we've built in an understanding that we're going to have to be resilient. How do you see resilience playing a part in the projects you're working on or the initiatives that you have from an implementation standpoint?
I think it's a great question, and for us, we're extremely lucky. I said it this morning that our management expects us to be innovative, and the thought process is, if you're not making mistakes, you're probably not being innovative, and learn from the mistakes and move on. And I think the resiliency is knowing that you're not going to get dragged through the mud if you make a mistake, and knowing that they're going to say, okay, that's great, learn from that, and then move on from there.
I think on the innovation side, we have an innovation culture that's being kind of, we have regionally and then from the statewide, and then it links to the bureaus, but that's been helpful for us to kind of get that understanding through to management because we're not talking on a day-to-day basis on the project level, often with senior management. But I do think, we need to have that kind of, that dialogue where there's trust involved, and we're resilient in that we can adapt. A lot of times, maybe management is nervous that the change is not going to be desired and there's just going to be reaction to it. And I think that is the case, but think about another couple of things. Where are all the drafters, the CAD drafters in your offices? That role now is really smaller, and maybe for some of you it's still there, but for a lot of there's so many changing job roles now that we have to reinvent ourselves to stay relevant. And I think that reinventing means adaptability to change.
And Daniel, what does resilience mean for you, from your perspective, your role? Again, choose your weapon.
Yeah, so kind of go off what George said a little bit earlier, is he's putting their trust in us, and us as the designers, we really need to give them the best product possible. And if that means that, we need to include as much innovation as possible, but yet we still need to go back and, include those traditional plan details, we need to get the project out as fast as possible, but yet push ourselves,
Yeah, so it's a balance, I would say.
Absolutely, yep.
Rochelle, did you have some more questions?
Yes, Francesca Mayer with Fair Cape Consulting's asked, if we want people to use our data, they have to trust it. How are you managing end user expectations, especially when you're delivering data that may not meet the ideals in terms of quality or interoperability?
That is a Francesca question, if I've ever heard one. That's awesome.
Well, in the BIM execution plan, you need to have the requirements and you need to set the level of accuracy in addition to the level of development. So if you're expecting someone to do 4D or 3D, and you need to know the contractor, the consultant, the DOT, all has to know exactly what that means. If you say you want the consultant and the contractor to have 0.05 on utilities, that's not what happens. So you have to be clear, and you have to be identifying those things as the requirements. Then that builds trust. On the LiDAR side, I'll give you an example. Like we LiDAR'd a bridge, and we gave that data to the consultants, and they said, we don't like this. It's showing every little pothole and everything. They said, give us our old stuff, which is less accurate. So, trust gets built up. Your bids get more improved. You get better bids when they know that the existing is better captured with reality capture. That's highly accurate. And you just kind of follow up that they see the proposed as that same way.
And Ben, does your execution plan address that? Do you find that it enables that in some way?
Well, it's about controlling expectations. So that execution planning is about use cases. To his point, if your expectation is to look at something in terms of high level of detail to sell it to the client and make sure they understand how you're going to build the work, then you model the heck out of it. It's a high level of detail. Maybe it's a low level of development because you need the time to design it. Whereas in the survey world, you have this high detailed model handed to you by the owner or the designer, and you have to strip it down to a low level of detail, but a high level of accuracy. You're not going to go build something that isn't released for construction at that point. So controlling the expectations is a big part of managing the data and those type of things. One other thing I will add is oftentimes the contractor's low-hanging fruit is efficiency. We always think, oh, we're going to build this model and we're going to be able to reduce our workforce by half and we're going to make a lot of money. But in reality, we're really shifting the responsibility from one group to another, from drafters to other people that are doing other jobs. And I think, really what I am after a lot more is risk, is managing risk. Being able to identify problems as early in the design cycle as possible solves a lot of the problems in construction. It's kind of like safety. When you're safe and you're not hurting anybody, you're not quite as worried about improving that. Where, so with risk, if you're low risk, you're not going to improve it. At high risk, you're absolutely going to want to try and improve those operations as early as possible.
And from the UK perspective, do you feel the mandate and some of those standards address that directly because now there's a common language and the expectation is set? How do you feel it's impacting that?
Well, I mean, the thing is, when I'm involved in the kind of BIM, in particular in academia and in the collaboration of the research with the industry, and the people saying it's really beneficial to use it. It takes more time, costs much money, it's worth doing it. But it's a good thing is recently the PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, was the commission to develop the measure for BIM benefits. So in a two-way, it can be directly, indirectly. So they built it 117 impact pathways according to 8 different categories. And time saving, and cost savings, and health and safety, and risk management, and so on. They all convert those the impact pathways into monetary term. So it's worth looking at that. Well, just Google it, PwC, BIM measure methodology. You can find the 4 different kind of the reports. And if you are not a reading person, then there'll be 3 pages kind of executive summary. So easy to understand how you're going to use it.
Ken actually shared that during the keynote as the good news of the day. The good news of the day was PwC created this report that's going to give us what the KPIs should be, give us some guidance on that, this commission report. That and being here today with us, which was really good.
As part of the report, they've got 2 examples of the projects. Unfortunately, they haven't got any infrastructure projects. This is office building and barriers and so on. So you can see that how it works with those methodologies as well.
George, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I think part of it is that, and for lack of a better use of words, the muscle memory of having the data in the field and then checking it against the plan sheets. What we found is if the data's there, then people go away from the plan sheets and they use the tablets in the field. And maybe from Ben's perspective, if we're not giving you good data and it doesn't match up to the plan sheet, that becomes an issue too. So once those plan sheets are gone, then you better rely on the data or else you're going to be in trouble.
I don't understand this. In the past, we were given a set of plans, and we had 2 separate teams that would come together and do takeoffs on those same set of plans, and that would be how we check our quantities. Today, we're being provided electronic information, and then we're just pushing it into 2 different software packages and thinking that that's a second check. But in reality, it's the same electronic information that came. So I guess we do struggle a lot in the contracting world of how do we check ourselves? I know we've had those questions with you. How do we verify that we're right if we're just using the electronic information? There's no cross sections to go back to, no roll plots, no second checks, gut checks that we have.
This is a really important thing that he's sharing about, I think, and something that all of you are probably wrestling with. But how many of you do red top or blue tops anymore for your survey construction stakeout checks? Very few. So we have to jump into this digital world whether we like it or not, because the construction folks, that's the direction they're going, and even us for checking. So we can't check against our model. We have to check with what's in the real world, exactly. So, that means you may need new tools, and so there is some dollars that are going to be needed. We have GPS rovers, we have GPS small little handhelds. There's a lot of ways to do it. There's handheld mobile LiDAR now, handheld LiDAR. So there's a lot of tools now, and so there's some investment needed.
All right, we have about 7 minutes left, so I want to make sure we can get another maybe 1, maybe 2 questions in.
All right, Alexa Mitchell, WSP. In yesterday's roundtable data integration between software platforms, what is your vision for unifying as one transportation owner community rather than individual DOTs with software vendors that support digital project delivery?
Ooh.
Could you repeat the question?
What is your vision for unifying as one transportation owner community rather than individual DOTs with software vendors that support digital project delivery?
So kind of what we talked about, the UK methodology of creating a common language. The benefit of the standards is we create this common language. Is that a possibility, do you think, for the DOTs to come together to create that common language?
I think to a point, there are certain areas that we can all agree on that are similar, like level of detail for certain information, for certain quality, accuracy, those kinds of things. But in other cases, you've got unique projects that may require specific focus in a certain area that may be that may warrant specific requirements based on the capabilities of the project delivery capabilities. So, you know, I think there's a standard that can be set, but in some ways, especially in innovative areas, there's areas that need to be unique to a specific DOT.
I think this data integration thing is a very key area, and it revolves around data management, and I think it also relates to the software vendors. We want, from a DOT owner perspective, I'm speaking for myself, you guys can chime in and whatnot over here, but I think the key thing that we don't want to have is 27 cloud solutions that we have to go to every cloud solution for our project, you know. So that's this federated cloud that we want to have our project in our data. That's our data, you know, per project level for our cloud, and then to have those, because a lot of the solutions are now in the cloud. So whether the IT is fighting you on your own data, you know, there's solutions that are being done in the cloud. Artificial intelligence is going to move in that direction too. But that's one key area. Another key area is to how to data manage to make sure that we're having everybody consistently rowing in the same direction.
Anyone else want to comment on that?
Yeah, so and I think throughout the country, work is done so differently between DOTs that there's no way to really say a standardized program set or anything can be built. You know, just through Baker, we use so many different asset management programs, design analysis programs, that we work with those DOTs, and they're really the ones that just say, hey, you know, we want project-wise, or we want asset-wise, or, you know, we want to use this type of system. So, and, you know, until we can get a base design, so like IFC or, you know, a couple of those, then we're going to see so many different programs and program sets out there.
Almost like a minimum requirement of data.
I'd also say that, you know, the role, the person, back to the human-based side of things, until we standardize a role, even an acronym that describes what this is, we're not going to get to the software.
So I think it's a real simple answer with a horribly complicated execution. And the answer is kind of like you said, IFC. It's a roadmap that has the fundamentals that all DOTs do. And that roadmap is like 25 miles long. But once there becomes that standard, then the software and the cloud and all that becomes just a conformance to that standard. And that's when the data flow can happen.
Absolutely. And in fact, there's Construction Progress Coalition, which is currently has a project for a common data exchange and bringing together owner, designer, contractor, supplier to say, look at all these workflows that we map throughout the entire life cycle. Are there 5 common data fields that we could say we all agree upon? Sweden, a much smaller country, much easier to do that. The general contractors just gathered together in Sweden and determined, here are our 5 metadata fields that we require on every document, every RFP, so that they could leverage the technology and leverage the cloud to more quickly search, leverage technology to eliminate some of those redundancies. And here are some minimum requirements. So I think it's a great question because it has to be 2 parts. It almost has to be peer-to-peer coming to an agreement on that, which means you're not defining and boiling the ocean, you're just coming to a minimum requirement. Will?
I was going to say simply the short answer is yes, it can happen, but perhaps not yet. People are coming from different places and have different systems for asset management, essentially for rendering that data. But actually, don't underestimate IFC. IFC is very, very powerful. Talk about 4 fields, I mean, it is much, way, way better than that.
And in Europe, it is talked about much more than it is in the US. Did we have somebody who wanted to respond to Lance's original question, or no? No? Let's do one more question. I think we have time for one more.
We got 2 minutes. So
2 minutes.
Response to it.
Okay, well,
All
there's
right.
one that just came in without a name, but it's one that I definitely think about a lot. So what thought has been given to how providing 3D deliverables might change pay items and quantities by giving the contractor the 3D design file and the ability to extract quantities, i.e., could earthwork be lump sum instead of cubic yards?
All right, I'll give two of you the ability to
We've-
answer, or three of you within 30
We've
seconds
given that a
each.
lot of thought and organized pay item by task, by activity codes, by work breakdown structures to try to find the simplest way to group pay items into 7 different categories, let's say. We did that for the Kosciuszko Bridge. So we give that a lot of thought.
I think the thought that we've got right now is if we can provide the model to the contractor before award or before advertising, look for any errors that may be in there, and then literally say it's planned quantity or lump sum, and we're not going to pay anything over. And then we go out and just validate surfaces. We get rid of tickets, we get rid of all that stuff, and all it is having the inspection and making sure that's there.
Ben?
Well, I think the biggest challenge for us is that that surface needs to be provided in a format that we can then slice and dice the way we need to. Breaking it down into the means and methods is how we're going to get to the price, the cost, the risk. We can't just have a single surface provided to us without it being in a format that we can break down into our construction processes.
All right, and I think that takes us right up sliding into home plate, right under time, John. Is that good?
Absolutely, we're at 2:29, so I do need to say thanks to everybody and kind of circle back to where you started, Sasha. A few of us did have discussions dating back 1 year ago now. I need to give them their props. So Sasha, you were definitely involved. Rochelle Venter from Michigan Infrastructure Transportation Association, META, and Alexa Mitchell from WSP. We started the initial conversations. Nathan Qualls from Keysoft came on board, and then Vern and Randy. So this is a group that put the vision together and pulled this off. I'm super happy about it. It's been great. So thanks for your time in doing that. And absolutely thanks to all the panelists for the time throughout the year that you've put into this and making your way to Lincoln, Nebraska. So I'm going to give David Unker for 15 seconds.
I just wanted to say, so how many think BIM is a big elephant to try to get our arms around in the United States?
Yeah.
And how do you eat an elephant, Rochelle? One bite at a time. So tomorrow, as Connie mentioned, we Federal Highways, we see the bigger picture. At least, you know, we're the National Highway Administration. So we're trying to gather your input on how to strategically implement BIM, to say what it is more simply, and to implement it. So I just reiterate the invitation for our focus group, and thank you.
All right, thanks everybody. Give them a round and we will take a break now.